Okay, well, now for the slideshow. I want to thank, I'm really, Sheldon is right. I tend to go too long, but I have a few slides, only because I wanted to tell you something about Kenneth Boulding, and you've already heard something about it. I'm certainly honored by this fellowship, and I want to spend the time talking not so much about my work, but about Boulding. I met Boulding literally about the same time that I met Sheldon, actually. That was again at the same meeting in New York City, which was a job market interview. At that point, he was interviewing for the University of Colorado, and I had spent some time in Colorado, and we had some mutual interests that grew out from that meeting. And I got to know him, and I followed his work. So I have a certain affinity, and I feel somewhat pleased to be able to be here and receive his fellowship. How could you describe him? Well, there was a description by somebody that many of you know, Mansur Olson, who described Kenneth Boulding in the following terms, that he was half Milton Friedman and half Mahatma Gandhi. And I think that's a pretty good description, actually, and it kind of fits in the flow of the discussion tonight. So I read his works, and many of you maybe know his works on economics and a reconstruction of economics. It was done many, many years ago. But he was more than an economist, and as he matured through life, he became a very broad-gauge scholar. I think he always started out with very broad interests, but he developed those interests. So over the course of his life, he actually wrote books of poetry. He was a lecturer on numerous topics and engaged in a wide variety of topics. Now, by the time I had met him, which was the same 69-70 meeting of the the American Economics Association, he had long lost interest in mainstream economics. But he was an active participant in social science. If you look at his book, The Reconstruction of Economics, it was a creative broadening of the field. He had an empirically based price theory. And if you look back at that book, I read the book as a graduate student, it actually was trying to use the theory of the firm and microeconomics by using the actual data, the balance sheet that firms use. At the same time that he was doing economics, he had become a very devout advocate of peace. That's why he was nominated, I think, for the Nobel Peace Prize. He was a Quaker, and he actually created a lot of relationships between the larger social science community and the peace community. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit about that. The evolutionary science was another one of his interests. He was president and one of the founders of its association, and he talked about much broader ways of thinking about how human beings and societies interact. Not just the market system, but other systems as well that actually branch out into what we think of today as much more broad conception of what economics is, social interactions and the kind of conflict resolution. One of his contributions, which I think is actually very timely in light of current, switch the slide, please. There you go. Was basically that he was very conscious already, and this is in a quote in this study in 1958, about looking at behavioral economics, and not in the sense that we mean it today, but I think in a way that's close to what we think of today, thinking more broadly about what the cognitive and neuronal bases were of social decision-making and individual decision-making. And so he was acutely conscious of this. And in the course of doing his work, he developed general systems theory, he integrated across fields, and he was running against the current in economics, which is becoming more specialized by broadening out. One of his contributions was founding the Journal of Conflict Resolution. And he was very interested in the notion of how economics and social science more broadly could state, frame, and resolve social conflicts. But he also had a very broad conception of social science. So we go to the second slide, and this is a quote you can read for yourself. He basically pointed out that economic problems have no sharp edges, and that they shade off into politics, sociology, and ethics. And so early on, even before he won the Bates-Clark Prize, even before he kind of maybe left mainstream economics as many understand it, he already recognized that there were deeper foundations for understanding social phenomena. But he also was a person, as part of his theory of evolutionary economics, he was interested in the question of how we learn. And so he had this great quotation. He was interested, he wrote this paper, famous paper, now in his 60s, where he basically said, correctly that nothing fails like success, because we don't learn from it. And he really was thinking of how we could evolve by failure, by trying, and so forth. And so to conclude, and this is a quote from his last years of his life, he thought he was deeply concerned about taking a broader conception of social science. And so his last quotation, which I put up, is one which I think is very powerful and actually resonates through a lot of social science, a lot of aspects of human development. And that is, we think more broadly about the power of love and the power of association and parenting, I think this insight that he had is really quite valuable. So thank you very much for putting me in his company and letting me tell you a little bit about his work. Thank you very much.